Like, comment, share, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Enjoy the show.
When we look at the Seattle Police Department, we see more than 50 years of corruption, bad policing, lies, cheating, and stealing. And that has been confirmed over the years from citizens, officers, and even the federal government. It's been painted that the defund the police movement and Black Lives Matter is what caused the massive number of Seattle police leaving the force, when nothing could be further from the truth. Let's have a chat about the Seattle Police Department. Back on June 8th, 2020, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, also known as the Capitol Hill Organized Protest, or CHOP, established a self-declared autonomous zone that was located in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle, Washington. It covered Carl Anderson Park and 6 other blocks. And it came shortly after the Seattle Police Department abandoned the East Precinct building.
Welcome to CHOP, and for those who live in it, it is now a part of their daily lives. 6 city blocks have now been transformed, now called CHOP, or the Capitol Hill Organized or Occupied Protest.
And now you might be saying that that sounds an awful like it was absolute chaos and anarchy, and it certainly appears unwarranted. However, I am reminded of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King.
A riot is the language of the unheard.
There are people out there claiming that the autonomous zone and the defund the police movement was the reason why officers were leaving. And they say this despite the fact that I can find YouTube videos from a year ago where officers were leaving the Seattle Police Department due to complaints about a toxic work environment and corruption.
These 42 exit interviews of Seattle police officers have a lot in common. Parting words praise the camaraderie among officers, some even applauding their direct supervisors. But a common complaint that popped up over and over again is about city politics. Officers who say they feel a lack of support from city council.
It would almost appear as if the Seattle City Council and the Washington State Governor Jay Inslee had no issue with the right wing in this country and the thin blue line or Blue Lives Matter folks just blaming Black Lives Matter and the defund the police movement, CHOP or CHAZ or whatever you want to call them, for all the issues that were happening with police, because that would take Governor Jay Inslee and the Seattle City Council off the hook for all the corruption that happened on their watch. So if you can blame non-government actors for problems that the government caused, well, if you're the government, why would you want those non-government actors to not catch the blame for something that is clearly your fault and something that was going on for a long time before those non-government actors even existed? Excuse me, but Black Lives Matter was not founded until July 13th, 2013. And here is a U.S. Justice Department report from 2011 stating that the Seattle Police Department was engaging in biased policing. And that's going to be a very important note, because this will not be the last time the U.S. Justice Department essentially calls the Seattle Police Department a bunch of racists. In fact, when you look into the Seattle Police Department, there is corruption and issues from top to bottom. The issue with making this video was condensing all of the issues that the Seattle Police Department currently suffers from and has suffered from for quite some time. Let's take a look at some examples. It is well known that the Seattle Police Department has had serious issues with racism, and that's one of the main reasons why they've been losing minority officers over the years. Here, let me give you some examples of that. Now, on the screen before you, it's a screenshot from the webpage of the ACLU in Washington State, and they have so kindly provided a timeline that outlines a decade of abusive police practices, corruption, flat-out racism, and the federal investigations that confirm that racism. Let's look at some of the Seattle Police Department's greatest hits. This footage that you're seeing of a protest may look recent, but this protest footage is actually from 2010. Now, Now, for our first incident, we have the shooting of John T. Williams, who was a Native American who was shot 4 times by former Seattle police officer Ian Burke, and Williams died at the scene. The shooting was ruled unjustified by the Seattle Police Department's own Firearms Review Board. Now, you might be saying, why was there protests and riots and so many people who were angry over the shooting of John T. Williams? Well, for one, this shooting was unjustified. 2, the man was a Native American, so he was murdered on his people's own land. And 3, he was a wood carver, or basically a carpenter. This murder struck a chord with so many people because John T. Williams was a carpenter who came from an oppressed people who was murdered by authorities. Gee, I wonder if there's any parallels to other stories that many Americans hold near and dear. So as you might imagine, this could have hurt their recruitment chances with Native Americans. And now let me show you where it hurt their recruiting chances with Hispanic Americans. You see, just like the John Williams case, there was another case that the federal government featured that shows some pretty unmistakable racial bias and some pretty interesting choice of words, while somebody who hadn't even done anything wrong was being assaulted by not 1 but 2 officers.
This racially charged video has caused a firestorm of controversy, not just in Seattle, but around the world. You can clearly see Seattle Police Detective Shandy Cobain kick a Hispanic man who he mistakenly thought was a robbery suspect. And then there's the audio.
You got me? I will beat the Mexican piss out of you, homie. You feel me?
Seconds later, the man moves his hand, appearing to wipe his eye. The officer kicks him in the head as he wipes his boot on his hand. A female officer stomps on his leg. Police realize they detained the wrong man, lift him up, and let him go. The video does not show a medic arriving on scene, even though the man has cuts on his face and appears to have trouble walking.
What I want you to do is relax your weight on the car, okay? All right? Put your hands back so you don't fall down, all right?
A freelance photographer captured the video.
So they kicked you in the head, man?
Yeah, they did.
Tell me why they kicked you in the head.
I don't know. They just came in the head, they knocked me down and kicked me in the head.
And you had nothing to do with what was going on?
Nothing to do.
And then, of course, the incident where you had a police officer quite literally kick a black teenager in the groin, kick the kid while he was falling, and then proceed to continue to assault this teenager for no apparent reason.
The juvenile rushes back into Joe's Mart because a bandana-wearing undercover cop is coming at him. Even though he raises his hands and stops, the officer throws a big kick to his groin. The kid falls down and gets 2 more hard kicks to his chest and his face.
And the reason why I highlighted those specific cases is because those are the 3 cases that were highlighted by the U.S. Department of Justice. The American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU in Washington State, was so kind as to provide a full detailed list of just some of the things that the Seattle Police Department has been involved in. And one could say that this list is quite exceptional. You had the 3 incidents that I just mentioned. On Friday, December 3rd, 2010, the then acting Assistant Attorney General received a letter from 35 community organizations, and as a result of that, the Department of Justice decided to launch an investigation into the Seattle Police Department. On Friday, December 16th, 2011, the DOJ completed their investigation, and they reported, quote, a pattern or practice of constitutional violations regarding the use of force that result from structural problems as well as serious concerns about biased policing, end quote. Friday, July 27, 2012, the U.S. government in Seattle entered into what is known as a consent decree requiring the city to implement reforms, quote, with the goal of ensuring that police services are delivered to the people of Seattle in a manner that fully complies with the Constitution and the laws of the United States States effectively ensures public and officer safety and promotes public confidence, end quote. A U.S. district judge named James Robart ordered that the final approval of this consent decree will be entered after the city, quote, achieved full and effective compliance and maintained such compliance for no less than 2 years, end quote, or the, quote, sustainment period, end quote. On Monday, January 14, 2013, a community police commission was created, and the goal was to, quote, promote greater transparency and public understanding of the Seattle Police Department, end quote, and was charged with reviewing the police accountability system and making any necessary recommendations. Now we're gonna pause here, and there's a reason we're gonna pause, because there is a report from the Seattle Times that you must see because it is quite exceptional. When the U.S. Justice Department launched their investigation and then in 2011 found evidence of biased policing and demanded an overhaul to Seattle PD, the then police chief was John Diaz, and he was police chief from May 2009 to May 2013. Now, if you were to go back over here to this ACLU report, what they point to is that on Thursday, April 24th, 2014, the Community Police Commission, or CPC, that was formed on January 14th, 2013, recommended some changes to the accountability system due to a scandal involving the police chief who was a different person from John Diaz, who oversaw the department, who apparently engaged in biased policing. Now, this next story is quite amazing because this would mean that back-to-back chiefs were involved in major scandals that hit nationwide headlines and had federal implications. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because the interim police chief for Seattle was Harry Bailey, and according to the Seattle PI report from 2014, or the same year that the ACLU is pointing to, there was a 16-page special review from a former municipal court judge named Ann Levinson, who used some actions by the then interim Seattle police chief Harry Bailey as examples as to why the Seattle Police Department might need some reforms. This man was going out of his way to just cover up things that officers were doing. Do you understand the implications of this? This man was supposed to replace the last guy who oversaw a department who engaged in some less than savory activities. So then this guy then turns around, being a black man, and decides to start covering up misconduct, and that shows that just making the police chief darker doesn't solve problems with corruption. Now, you would think that the Seattle Police Department and their officers plus their police chiefs would be on their best behavior, given that the federal government, state governments, and community organizations, along with the media, were on their backs and watching everything that they do. And now that they've had this consent decree, surely the Seattle Police Department would have honored their end of the deal to show transparency and also to not just abuse people. Well, you would be sadly mistaken if that's what you thought. For example, in 2014, a Seattle police officer by the name of Cynthia Whitlatch accused an elderly man of threatening people with his golf club and also threatening her with the same golf club. When it turns out, this man was not threatening anyone with the golf club. He was just walking while using the golf club as a cane because his walk was over 10 miles and he had taken the same route, oftentimes with the same golf club, for years.
You just swung that golf club at me.
I did not.
Yes, you did. Right back there.
I didn't see you on the way no golf club.
It was on audio and videotape. Put it down.
Mr. Wingate wasn't having it. The Air Force veteran and retired Metro bus driver tried to explain to Officer Whitlatch that he uses the club as a walking stick and was just minding his own business. The officer calls for backup and the senior citizen was placed under arrest and put into a paddy wagon, which, because of his age, he needed help being placed into, according to the report. Officer Whitlatch's own ex-girlfriend, who was also a police officer at one point, says that she used to drop the N-bomb like crazy around her when talking about her day on the job.
So we're gonna skip forward a little bit to 2019. Now, do you remember that consent decree that the city of Seattle and the U.S. government had in order to ensure that the Seattle Police Department wasn't abusing people and and engaging in unconstitutional behavior. Well, it turns out on Wednesday, May 15th, 2019, Judge Robart ruled that the city has fallen out of full and effective compliance in the area of discipline and accountability. And then on May 21st, 2019, Judge Robart issued a written order for the United States and Seattle to work with CPC and the court monitor and submit by July 15th, 2019, a proposal for how the city will regain compliance. And so basically from that point on, the court essentially issued that the 2-year period would have to be restarted. Now granted, it is the same consent decree, but according to court documents, the city fell out of compliance. Well, the time limit just restarted essentially. And now you might be thinking, what made them fall out of compliance? Well, if we scroll back up, we see that there were several issues that popped up, such as on November 20th, 2018, the Seattle Police Department's Disciplinary Review Board reversed the firing of Officer Adley Shepard, who punched a handcuffed woman seated in the back of his patrol car hard enough to fracture the orbital rim of her right eye. The board reduced Shepard's discipline to a 15-day suspension and ordered he be reinstated to a new position and receive full back pay, less suspended days, which is probably why on November 5th, 2018, Judge Robart noticed some inconsistencies in the contracts and the requirements for the consent decree. And one of the things that Judge Robart noted on Wednesday, October 17th, 2018, was that the Seattle Police Department was trying to roll back reforms contained in the accountability law that came as a result of the consent decree and the fact that the federal government had to interfere. On Wednesday, January 10th, 2018, the judge granted the city's motion to start the clock on the 2-year sustainment period. Now, we already fast forward to 2019, so you already know how that turned out. And then you had the shooting of Charlena Lyles, which caused a serious issue, and I'll show you why.
Seattle police responded to a burglary call at Lyle's apartment near Magnuson Park and say she advanced on them with a knife when they opened fire, killing Lyles, who was pregnant.
This, as well as several other issues, are the real reasons why officers have been leaving Seattle. Because who wants to work for a department that's known for all this stuff? I mean, a lot of this stuff began back in 2010 and 2011. And the last time I checked, Black Lives Matter didn't even exist then. So can we finally kill this lie that Black Lives Matter and the Defund the Police movement has chased out officers from Seattle, as if that were the only reason, and as if officers weren't fleeing Seattle before because of the department's ineptitude, corruption, and flat-out racism. And instead of the department just addressing problems, they just play the melanin roulette and bring in another dark person because that means that Barack Obama didn't drone strike any black or brown people. But what do I know? I'm just the devil in the details.